On a brutal New York City night, two separate worlds were set on a collision course. One belonged to a reclusive billionaire, the king of a global fashion empire, who found himself freezing and abandoned with nothing. The other belonged to a young waitress buried in debt, whose only possession of any real value was the warm coat on her back. She offered him that coat, her only protection against the storm, expecting nothing in return. She had no way of knowing she had just saved one of the world's most powerful men, or that this simple gesture of humanity would plunge her into his world of unimaginable luxury, dangerous secrets, and life-altering opportunity. This is the remarkable account of how a single thread of kindness wove an entirely new destiny. The wind that howled down the Bowery that January night was a physical entity, a predator with teeth of ice. It found every crack in the old brickwork of the daily grind, the 24-hour diner where Clara Hayes spent most of her waking hours. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and frying onions, a scent that clung to her clothes and hair long after her shifts ended. At 24, Clara felt closer to 50, her dreams of attending the Fashion Institute of Technology. Fight had evaporated 2 years ago, consumed by the towering inferno of her mother's medical bills. After her mother passed, the debt remained a cold, heavy ghost tethered to her name. Now her life was a repeating cycle of taking orders, wiping down sticky tables, and counting the meager tips that were never quite enough. Her one treasure, the one thing that connected her to her past and her dormant dreams, was the jacket she wore. It was a vintage wool peacoat, a deep charcoal grey that had been her mother's. It was worn, the lining patched in 3 places, but the cut was timeless. Clara, with her innate eye for design, had subtly altered it, reinforcing the seams with a distinctive cross-stitch pattern on the cuffs using a dark crimson thread. It was her signature on a masterpiece nobody else would ever recognize. That jacket was her armor against the cold, but more than that, it was her last tangible piece of her mother's embrace. Just after 2 a.m., when the diner was populated only by the city's ghosts, a lone cabbie nursing a coffee, a couple of students cramming under the flickering fluorescent lights, the door swung open with a violent gust of wind. A man stumbled in, and he didn't look like he belonged. He wasn't one of the usual lost souls. He was clean, but utterly ravaged. He wore a tailored black tuxedo, now soaked and disheveled, the kind of suit you'd see at a gala at the Met, not in a grimy diner at this hour. But he had no overcoat, no scarf, no gloves. His face, sharp and handsome, with high cheekbones and intense grey eyes, was pale with a bluish tint around his lips. His dark hair was matted with what looked like melting sleet. He was shivering uncontrollably, his whole body racked with violent tremors. He collapsed into the booth nearest the door, fumbling with his hands as if he'd lost all dexterity. Clara's boss, a perpetually sour man named Mr. Henderson, glanced up from his racing form. "Hey, pal, you gonna order or just drip all over my floor?" The man didn't seem to hear. He was trying to speak, but his teeth chattered too hard. Clara felt a pang of something sharp and urgent. It wasn't pity. It was a profound, almost painful empathy. She saw past the expensive ruined suit to the raw human suffering beneath. She ignored Mr. Henderson's glare, poured a mug of hot water from the coffee machine, and added a slice of lemon and a spoonful of honey. She brought it to the man's booth. "Here," she said softly, her voice steady. "Drink this. It'll help." He looked up at her, and his eyes, though clouded with cold and confusion, held a flicker of surprise. He reached for the mug, but his hands were shaking too violently. Clara instinctively placed her own hands over his, steadying the mug as he brought it to his lips. The warmth was immediate and stark. "Thank you." He managed to rasp his voice, a dry whisper. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," she said, her concern overriding her usual quiet demeanor. "Do you have a phone?" "Someone you can call." He shook his head, a gesture of profound weariness. "Lost it. Everything." Mr. Henderson lumbered over. "All right, that's enough. The charity hour is over. Buy something or get out. I'm not running a shelter." "He's freezing, Mr. Henderson," Clara pleaded. "Just let him warm up for a few minutes. A few minutes is up. Out." He pointed a greasy thumb toward the door. The man tried to stand, but a wave of dizziness sent him slumping back into the booth. Clara saw it then, the desperate vulnerability. This wasn't a choice for him. The city would swallow him whole tonight. In that moment, Clara made a decision that made no logical sense. It defied her poverty, her own need, her own shivering walk home that awaited her. She shrugged off her mother's peacoat. The sudden cold of the diner air hit her thin sweater, but she ignored it. She draped the heavy wool coat over the man's trembling shoulders. It was far too small for his broad frame, but it was warm and dry. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. I can't," he stammered. "You have to," she insisted, pulling the lapels closer around his neck. He could feel the residual warmth of her body in the fabric. Just for tonight. Get somewhere safe. She reached into her own pocket and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, her taxi fare home. She'd have to walk the 30 blocks now. She tucked it into the pocket of the tuxedo jacket. For a cab. He just stared at her, his grey eyes searching her face as if trying to memorize it. He seemed to be fighting to say something important, but the cold had robbed him of his words. He fumbled inside his own jacket, his fingers stiff and clumsy. He pulled out a small rectangular card and pressed it into her hand. "Find me," he whispered, his voice cracking. Before she could respond, he gathered a sliver of strength, pulled her coat tight around himself, and stumbled back out into the raging storm, disappearing into the swirling snow. Clara was left standing in the middle of the diner, shivering in her thin sweater, with a soggy embossed business card in her hand. "You're a fool, Hayes," Mr. Henderson grunted, shaking his head as he returned to the counter. "A complete fool. That coat was the only decent thing you owned." Clara looked down at the card. The ink was slightly smeared. It read, Silas Sterling, Creative Director. Sterling Atelier. She'd never heard of it. It was probably some small, insignificant design shop. She sighed, the weight of her decision settling upon her. She had just given away the last piece of her mother to a stranger for a meaningless piece of cardstock. A cold deeper than the winter wind began to seep into her bones. The 30-block walk home was a special kind of torment. The icy wind sliced through Clara's thin sweater, and by the time she reached her tiny fifth-floor walk-up in the Lower East Side, her own teeth were chattering as violently as the stranger's had been. She spent the night huddled under every blanket. She owned the ghost of her mother's coat, a tangible absence. Mr. Henderson was right. She was a fool. The next morning, nursing a head cold and a deep sense of regret, she looked again at the business card. Sterling Atelier. Out of a bleak curiosity, She typed the name into the cracked screen of her old smartphone. Her breath caught in her throat. The search results exploded with images of supermodels on runways in Paris and Milan, articles from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and the Wall Street Journal. Sterling Atelier wasn't a small shop. It was a global luxury fashion house, a titan of haute couture, famous for its revolutionary designs and astronomical prices. A single sterling handbag cost more than she made in a year. And Silas Sterling. He was no mere creative director. He was a myth, a legend, a design prodigy who had inherited the company at 25 and transformed it into an empire. He was also notoriously reclusive, a genius who rarely appeared in public, his face known only from a few grainy photographs. He was the invisible king of a world she could only dream of. Clara stared at the card. It had to be a fake. A cruel joke. The man in the diner was probably a delusional partygoer who'd stolen a wallet. The real Silas Sterling wouldn't be freezing to death on the Bowery. Shaking her head, she tossed the card into a small wooden box where she kept buttons, loose threads, and other mementos. Another broken piece of a broken dream. Meanwhile, across town, in a sprawling penthouse overlooking South Central Park, the real Silas Sterling was battling a severe case of pneumonia. The night had been a blur of cold pain and disorientation. He'd made it back on foot, stumbling through his own lobby like a vagrant, before his security team had recognized him and sounded the alarm. His ordeal hadn't been an accident. It was a meticulously planned coup. His ambitious sister Beatrice, the COO of Sterling Atelier, had arranged it. During a tense family dinner to discuss the company's future, she had drugged his wine. Her men had then driven him out to a deserted industrial park in Queens, stealing his phone wallet and overcoat, and leaving him to freeze. Their goal to have him declared missing and incapacitated so she could seize control at a critical board meeting scheduled for the next day. But they hadn't counted on his sheer will to survive, or on Clara Hayes. For 2 days, Silas drifted in and out of a feverish state, attended by a private doctor. His first coherent words were not about his sister or the business. They were the jacket, the waitress, his fiercely loyal executive assistant, Isabelle Laurent, a woman in her 40s with a razor-sharp mind and an impeccable sense of style, was by his side. "Sir, I was in a diner," Silas rasped, his voice hoarse. "On the Bowery, I think. A young woman. She gave me her coat, a grey peacoat. There was stitching on the cuff. Crimson." He remembered the feel of the warm wool, the scent of lavender, and something uniquely hers that clung to the fabric. He remembered the quiet dignity in her eyes, the kindness that had radiated from her like a palpable force. She hadn't asked for anything. She had simply given. In a world of transactional relationships, her selfless act was an anomaly, a beacon. "I need you to find her, Isabel," he commanded, his voice gaining a sliver of its usual authority. "I don't care what it takes. Find that diner. Find that woman." "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Isabel said already, tapping notes into her tablet. "Do you have a name? A description?" Clara Silas whispered the name, surfacing from the fog of his memory. He wasn't sure if he'd heard it or imagined it. Or maybe he couldn't remember. Young. Brown hair, kind eyes. That's all I have. And the coat. The coat is the key. The mission was next to impossible. The Bowery and its surrounding neighborhoods were home to dozens, if not hundreds, of diners, cafes, and greasy spoons. For the next week, Isabelle Laurent, a woman more accustomed to negotiating with Parisian textile magnates and scheduling private jets, found herself in the gritty underbelly of New York. She moved with quiet efficiency, showing a photo of a similar peacoat to gruff owners and world-weary waitstaff. She was met with shrugs, suspicion, and outright hostility. No one knew anything. No one cared. Back at the atelier, Beatrice was seething. Silas had recovered enough to join the board meeting via video call from his bed, his face pale but his mind sharp. Her coup had failed spectacularly. Now he was back in control, and she was under a cloud of suspicion she couldn't dispel. When she heard about his obsessive search for some anonymous waitress, she was filled with contempt. "He's lost his mind," she vented to her confidant, fixated on some charity case while the spring collection hangs in the balance. "This is a weakness, a sentimentality we can use." She instructed her own people to subtly interfere with Isabel's search. A few diner owners were quietly paid to forget seeing anyone matching the description. To Beatrice, this waitress was a loose thread that needed to be snipped before she could be woven into the family tapestry. A week turned into 2. Clara's life continued its downward spiral. Her cold worsened, her tips dwindled, and an eviction notice was taped to her apartment door. The memory of the stranger was a sore spot, a reminder of her own foolish, impulsive nature. She had given away her warmth and her history, and for what? An empty gesture. The world, it seemed, did not reward such things. She was starting to believe Mr. Henderson was right about everything. The heating system at the Daily Grind chose the coldest day in February to finally give up the ghost. A frigid draft now supplemented the icy glares of Mr. Henderson. The waitstaff wore extra layers, their breath misting in the air as they delivered plates of lukewarm eggs. For Clara, who now only had a thin hoodie to wear under a cheap wind-permeable jacket, each shift was an exercise in endurance. She was clearing away plates from a corner booth when the bell above the door chimed. A woman entered who was so out of place she might as well have landed from another planet. She was tall and elegant, wrapped in a tailored Christian Dior coat, the color of cream. Her leather gloves were buttery soft, and her sharp, intelligent eyes swept across the dingy diner, missing nothing. This was Isabelle Laurent. After 2 weeks of dead ends and false leads, her methodical search had finally led her here. She had cross-referenced every 24-hour establishment with staff rotas she'd discreetly acquired, looking for female employees working the graveyard shift on the night of the storm. Henderson immediately approached her, his usual scowl replaced with a fawning, greasy smile. "Welcome, ma'am. Table for 1. Isabel's gaze was cool. "I'm looking for one of your employees. A young woman likely worked the late shift about 2 weeks ago, on the night of the blizzard." Henderson's eyes flickered with a flicker of recognition, and then cunning. Beatrice's associate had paid him a visit and $100 last week to forget that night. "Don't recall anyone special. We get a lot of people through here." But Isabel's attention had been caught by someone else. An elderly woman with kind, wrinkled eyes, sitting at the counter, a regular named Mrs. Gable. She had seen the whole exchange that night, and had been touched by Clara's kindness. Mrs. Gable gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards the back of the diner, where Clara was scraping plates into a bin. Isabel's eyes followed the gesture and landed on Clara. She saw the worn-out sneakers, the cheap hoodie, the tired look on her face. It didn't fit the profile of a gold digger or an opportunist. It fit the profile of exactly the kind of person Silas had described. Ignoring Henderson, Isabel walked directly towards Clara. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and professional. "My name is Isabel Laurent. I'm looking for the woman who gave her coat to a man during the storm 2 weeks ago." Clara froze, a half-eaten piece of toast stuck to a plate in her hand. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She immediately thought she was in trouble. Had the man been a criminal? Was this his angry wife or girlfriend demanding the jacket back? "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her default defense mechanism of deflecting and disappearing kicking in. "Please," Isabel said, her voice softening slightly. She could see the fear in the young woman's eyes. "You are not in any trouble. Quite the opposite. The man you helped is my employer. He was very ill. You saved his life." The words hung in the air. Saved his life? It sounded so dramatic, so unreal. Mr. Henderson bustled over. "Hey, leave my staff alone. She's working." Isabel fixed him with a look that could have frozen magma. "I suggest you return to whatever it is you do. This is a private matter." She then turned back to Clara. "My employer, Mr. Silas Sterling, would like to thank you personally. He also wants to return your property." Clara's mind was reeling. Silas Sterling, the name from the card. It was real. The man from the storm, the freezing stranger in the ruined tuxedo, was the reclusive billionaire designer. It was impossible. I have to get back to work," Clara said weakly, overwhelmed. "Of course," Isabel said, undeterred. She pulled a crisp, heavy stock envelope from her Hermès clutch. On the front, in elegant calligraphy, was the name Miss Clara Hayes. Isabel had done her homework. "Mr. Sterling has requested your presence at the atelier tomorrow at noon for a private appointment. A car will be waiting for you at your address at 11:30. Please accept his gratitude." She placed the envelope on a nearby clean table and gave Clara a small, reassuring smile before turning and gliding out of the diner, leaving a stunned silence and the faint, expensive scent of Chanel No. 5 in her wake. The entire diner had been watching. Clara's co-worker, Veronica, a woman with a perpetually sneering expression, let out a derisive snort. A private appointment. With Silas Sterling. "Yeah, right. He's probably suing you for assault with a deadly jacket." Mr. Henderson snatched the envelope from the table. "What is this nonsense?" He felt the weight of the card stock, saw the embossed crest of the Sterling brand. His face paled slightly. Clara, moving as if in a dream, took the invitation from his slackened grip. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside the heavy card simply read, "Ms. Hayes, your kindness was a light in the dark. Please allow me to return it. A car will await you. Sincerely, Silas Sterling." It was a summons to another universe. A universe of wealth and power she couldn't comprehend. And as she stood there, shivering in the freezing diner, holding an invitation to the heart of a fashion empire, she felt a terrifying mix of hope and dread. Hope that her life was about to change, and dread that it would be in a way she was completely unprepared for. The morning of the appointment, Clara stood in front of the cracked mirror in her small apartment, a frantic mess of anxiety. What does one wear to meet a billionaire? Her wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and her diner uniform. The irony was crushing. She was being summoned to one of the world's most prestigious fashion houses, and she had absolutely nothing to wear. She finally settled on her only good outfit, a simple black dress she'd bought from a thrift store years ago, paired with a mended cardigan. It was clean and neat, but under the harsh light of her bathroom, she felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up. She nearly called the number on the card to cancel a dozen times, convinced it was all a mistake, a prank, or worse, a trap. At precisely 11:30 a.m., she looked out her window and saw it. A sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class, silent and imposing, parked at the curb of her graffiti-lined street. It was as out of place as a spaceship. The driver, a man in a crisp black suit, stepped out and stood by the rear door, waiting. This was real. The ride downtown was a silent, surreal journey through a city she suddenly didn't recognize. The familiar gritty streets of her neighborhood gave way to the gleaming canyons of Midtown Manhattan. When the car pulled up in front of the Sterling Atelier flagship store on Fifth Avenue, Clara felt a fresh wave of nausea. The building was a monument of glass and white marble, an imposing temple of fashion. The windows displayed not clothes but art installations involving single perfect shoes or impossibly draped silks. Through the glass doors, she could see a cavernous minimalist interior where impossibly chic salespeople drifted like specters among discerning, wealthy clients. Taking a deep breath, she walked towards the entrance. A formidable security guard in a tailored suit stopped her before she could even touch the door. "Can I help you, miss?" His tone was polite, but dismissive, his eyes flicking over her thrift store dress with clear disdain. I have an appointment," Clara stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "With Mr. Sterling." The guard's expression didn't change, but a flicker of disbelief crossed his eyes. "Name Clara Hayes." He spoke quietly into his wrist communicator. A moment later, his posture shifted. "My apologies, Miss Hayes. Please come in. Ms. Laurent is waiting for you." He held the heavy glass door open for her. As she stepped inside, a wave of warm, subtly perfumed air washed over her. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft click of her worn-out flats on the polished marble floor. Everyone seemed to be looking at her, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Just as the panic began to set in, Isabelle Laurent appeared, her expression warm and professional. "Ms. Hayes." "Welcome. I'm so glad you could make it." She guided Clara past the intimidating showroom towards a private elevator. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in his private studio." The elevator ascended silently, opening into a space that took Clara's breath away. It was a vast, light-filled studio with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Central Park. One wall was covered in corkboard, pinned with sketches, fabric swatches, and inspirational photographs. Another held shelves of art and design books. In the center of the room, standing by a large drafting table, was him. He was no longer the freezing, disheveled man from the diner. He was tall and commanding, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black cashmere sweater and grey trousers. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his grey eyes, now clear and piercingly intelligent, met hers across the room. He looked every bit the legend, the titan of industry. Yet as he looked at her, his expression was not one of power, but of profound, quiet gratitude. "Ms. Hayes." "Silas Sterling," said his voice, a low, resonant baritone. "Thank you for coming." He walked towards her, and for a moment Clara was frozen, unsure whether to curtsy, shake his hand, or run. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. He turned to a nearby mannequin which was draped in a garment bag. With a theatrical slowness, he unzipped the bag. Inside, hanging perfectly, was her mother's charcoal grey peacoat. But it was different. It had been professionally cleaned. The wool was soft and restored, every loose thread mended. It looked not just new, but revered, preserved. The subtle crimson cross-stitching she had done on the cuff stood out a tiny personal detail in this world of perfection.
Thank you,
she breathed, overwhelmed with emotion, as she reached out to touch the familiar fabric.
No, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you, Silas said, his voice laced with an intensity that startled her. I don't wish to be dramatic, but the doctors were quite clear. Another hour out there. Well, you didn't just give me a jacket. You gave me a great deal more than that. He then gestured for her to sit in one of the plush white armchairs. As Isabel served them tea in delicate porcelain cups, Silas recounted a carefully edited version of that night's events. He spoke of a serious business disagreement and of being dangerously stranded. He didn't mention his sister's betrayal, but Clara could sense the dark undercurrents beneath his calm words. He spoke of his desperation, the bone-deep cold, and the sudden unexpected warmth of her selfless act. As he spoke, his gaze kept drifting to the peacoat on the mannequin. "There's something I have to ask you," he said, leaning forward slightly. He pointed to the cuff. "This stitching, it's not original to the coat's design. It's a reinforcing stitch, but the pattern is unique. Did you do this?" Clara blushed, feeling exposed.
Yes.
The seam was coming loose. "It's remarkably precise." Silas mused, his eyes narrowing in professional assessment. "The tension is perfect, and the choice of a contrasting crimson thread. It's not just a repair. It's a design choice, an embellishment. It gives the garment character. Where did you learn to sew like that?" "My mother taught me," Clara said softly. "I wanted to. I was studying fashion design at FIT, but I had to drop out." A look of understanding dawned on Silas's face. It all clicked into place. The innate kindness, the appreciation for a well-made garment, the hidden talent in a single frayed cuff. He saw not just a waitress who had saved him, but a kindred spirit, a designer whose dreams had been derailed. And in that moment, his plan for how to thank her crystallized into something far grander and far more dangerous than simply returning a coat. "A simple thank you is insufficient for what you did," Clara Silas said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded strange and formal in his resonant voice. "Words are cheap. Sterling Atelier deals in tangibles." He stood and walked towards a set of tall, unmarked white doors at the far end of the studio. "I had hoped to repay your warmth in kind." With a soft click, he opened the doors, revealing a walk-in closet the size of Clara's entire apartment. But it wasn't a closet. It was a private boutique. Racks upon racks of clothes were arranged by color and style. There were Sterling Atelier cashmere coats, Chanel tweed jackets, tailored trousers, and silk blouses. Shelves displayed a breathtaking collection of shoes, Louboutins, Manolo Blahniks, and handbags from Hermès and Fendi. A jewelry tray glittered with delicate gold necklaces and diamond earrings. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was a fantasy made real, a treasure trove of impossible beauty. "I took the liberty of having Isabel ascertain your measurements," Silas explained, his tone matter-of-fact. "Everything here is for you. A new wardrobe. Consider it a token of my profound appreciation." Clara stared at the sea of luxury. A part of her was dizzy with excitement, but a larger, more insistent part felt a deep unease. This was too much. This was the kind of grand gesture a billionaire makes to erase a debt, to turn a human connection into a transaction. It felt like charity, a golden kit being built around the memory of a simple, honest moment. "Mr. Sterling." "Silas, I can't accept this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's too much, my jacket. It was just a coat. This is a fortune." Silas watched her, his expression unreadable. He had half expected this. He had seen the pride in her eyes at the diner. "You feel this cheapens your act of kindness," he stated. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, relieved that he understood. "Yes, I didn't do it for a reward." "I know that," he said softly. "That is precisely why you deserve it." However he paused, closing the doors to the magnificent wardrobe, I sense that this is not the repayment you truly want. He walked back to the drafting table and picked up a charcoal pencil, turning it over in his fingers. "When I looked at the stitching on your coat, I didn't just see a repair. I saw talent. I saw potential that has been sidelined by circumstance. Am I wrong? I don't design anymore." Clara said the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. That Silas replied is a statement I refuse to accept. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze intense and serious. "The clothes in that room are just things, Clara. They are beautiful, but they are hollow. The true gift I want to offer you is not a wardrobe, but an opportunity. Sterling Atelier runs a highly competitive paid internship program. The applicants are the best of the best from every top design school in the world. It is a brutal, demanding, and career-making experience." He set the pencil down. "I am offering you a place in the upcoming program. You would be paid a generous salary enough to clear your debts and live comfortably. You would have access to our resources, our craftsmen, our archives. You would learn from the best in the business. It will not be easy. You will be judged on your merit and your merit alone. My recommendation will get you in the door, but it will be your talent that keeps you there." Clara's world tilted on its axis. This was the dream she had been forced to bury, the future she had mourned. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a chance to earn back the life she had lost. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude. "Yes," she whispered the word, catching in her throat. "Yes. Absolutely, yes." A rare, small smile touched Silas's lips. "Good. Isabel will handle the paperwork. You start on Monday." He then gestured back to the wardrobe. "And please take the clothes. You can't very well show up to intern at Sterling Atelier in a thrift store dress. Consider it your new uniform." This time the wardrobe felt different. It wasn't charity anymore. It was an investment, an armor for the battles to come. News of the new intern spread through the atelier like wildfire. No one knew the full story, only that a former waitress with no degree had been personally hired by Silas Sterling. The rumors were vicious and immediate. She was his secret lover. She was blackmailing him. She was a charity project he would soon grow tired of. Beatrice Sterling heard the news with icy fury. She had her sources investigate Clara Hayes and the story they pieced together, a chance meeting in a diner. A given coat was both absurd and deeply threatening. She didn't see a good Samaritan. She saw a calculating nobody who had somehow sunk her claws into her brother's sentimental heart. Silas was brilliant, but he had this one blind spot, a weakness for a sob story. This girl, Beatrice, decided was a vulnerability, a threat to her own position, which was already precarious after her failed coup. Clara Hayes represented an unknown variable, an emotional attachment that could give Silas a strength Beatrice couldn't predict or control. "So my brother has a new pet project," she said to her assistant, her voice dripping with venom. "Well, pets can be trained, and they can be put down." Beatrice began to formulate a new plan. A plan not to oust Silas, but to isolate him. And the first step was to destroy his newfound prodigy. She would make Clara's life inside the atelier a living hell, ensuring she failed so spectacularly that Silas would be forced to cast her out, severing the bond between them and proving his emotional judgment to be flawed. The internship wouldn't be a dream come true. It would be a trial by fire, and Beatrice Sterling would be fanning the flames. Clara's first day at Sterling Atelier felt like being dropped into the middle of the ocean. Dressed in a pair of impeccably tailored Sterling trousers and a silk blouse from her new wardrobe, she looked the part, but she felt like a complete fraud. The other 5 interns were a clique of impossibly poised and confident graduates from Central St. Martin's, Parsons, and the Royal College of Art. They spoke in a shorthand of fashion theory and obscure European designers, their gazes sliding over Clara with a mixture of pity and contempt. They nicknamed her the Waitress. Her first few weeks were a blur of overwhelming tasks. She was relegated to grunt work, cataloguing fabric archives in a dusty basement, running errands for senior designers, and making endless cups of coffee. She did it all without complaint, her work ethic from the diner serving her well. She was observant, soaking up every detail, every conversation, every sketch she could glimpse. Slowly she began to learn, and too, Silas remained a distant though watchful presence. He offered no special treatment, adhering to his promise that she would succeed or fail on her own merit. His mentorship came in the form of brief, incisive critiques of her work during group reviews. "Your concept is strong, but your execution is timid," he would say, or "you're relying on aesthetics, not story." His words were tough but fair, and they pushed her harder than any textbook ever could. The first major project for the interns was to design a single evening gown for a hypothetical Met Gala theme, urban mythology. This was Clara's chance to prove herself. Drawing on her own life, she envisioned a gown that represented the resilience of the city. She designed a dress with a structured armor-like bodice made of recycled treated materials, which flowed into a skirt of soft, ethereal grey silk, like smoke rising from concrete. The design was deeply personal, reflecting her own journey from grit to grace. She worked tirelessly, staying late every night, her hands once accustomed to holding coffee pots, now deftly handling pins and shears. Her sketches were beautiful, and her concept was strong. For the first time, a few of the senior staff began to look at her with a flicker of respect. This was precisely what Beatrice had been waiting for. The first act of sabotage was subtle. The specific bolts of grey silk organza that Clara had sourced from a rare supplier in Italy went missing from the fabric room just days before her prototype was due. The inventory system showed they had never arrived. Clara panicked. There was no time to reorder. She was forced to use a lesser quality, slightly different colored silk that didn't drape the same way, compromising the central vision of her design. Next, the digital pattern file for her complex bodice, which she had spent a week perfecting, became corrupted. The IT department claimed it was a random server glitch, but the timing was too perfect. She had to pull 2 all-nighters, redrawing the entire pattern by hand, a painstaking process that left her exhausted and on edge. Through it all, Beatrice watched from the sidelines, her expression one of cool sympathy. Such a shame, she'd said to Clara in the hallway, her voice like honeyed poison. The industry can be so unforgiving. Perhaps you're just not cut out for this level of pressure. The final blow came during the intern presentations. As Clara presented her gown flawed but still beautiful, a testament to her resilience, Beatrice interrupted. "An interesting concept, Miss Hayes." She began, a predatory smile on her face. So interesting, in fact, that it seems the house of Valerius in Paris agrees with you. On a large screen, she projected an image. It was a sketch of a gown remarkably similar to Clara's, bearing the signature of Jean-Pierre Valerius Sterling's fiercest rival. The sketch had been leaked to a prominent fashion blogger that very morning. The implication was clear and devastating Clara the outsider. The charity case was a corporate spy. She had stolen a Sterling design and leaked it. The room fell into a shocked silence. The other interns stared at her with open hostility. The senior designers looked betrayed. Clara stood frozen in horror, the blood draining from her face. "No," she whispered. "I didn't. I would never." Silas's face was like stone. The company's policy on corporate espionage was absolute immediate termination and legal action. His expression was one of deep, profound disappointment. "Clara," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "My office. Now." In his studio, the silence was heavy and suffocating. Clara's mind was racing, trying to make sense of the nightmare. It was a setup, a frame job so perfect, she had no way to defend herself. "I didn't do it." "Silas," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She looked him in the eye, her own gaze desperate but clear. "I don't know how that happened, but it wasn't me. You have to believe me." Silas stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He saw the genuine terror and confusion in her eyes. He also saw the same unwavering integrity he'd seen in the diner that night. It didn't align with the actions of a spy. Then he thought about the recent series of unfortunate events, the missing fabric, the corrupted file. Random accidents, or a pattern? His gaze sharpened, not with anger at Clara, but with a cold, dawning suspicion directed elsewhere. "This meeting is over," he said cryptically. He turned to his intercom. "Isabel, cancel my afternoon, and get our head of security in here. I want a full forensic audit of the IT servers and a review of all security footage from the fabric room for the last 2 weeks. He turned back to Clara. "Go home, Clara. Don't talk to anyone. I will handle this." His tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't condemning either. It was the tone of a man on the hunt. The investigation was swift and ruthless. Isabel Laurel, using her formidable network, discovered that the fashion blogger who broke the leak had received a large anonymous payment from an offshore account. The IT audit revealed that the file corruption on Clara's design originated not from a random glitch, but from a specific terminal, the one in Beatrice Sterling's office. The final piece of evidence was the security footage. It showed Beatrice's personal assistant entering the fabric room late one night and leaving with the exact bolts of silk Clara had ordered. The pieces snapped together into a portrait of cold, calculated betrayal. It wasn't just about sabotaging an intern. It was about manipulating Silas, about proving his judgment was compromised by emotion. That evening, Silas called a private meeting in the main boardroom. It was just him, Beatrice and Isabel, who stood silently in the corner, holding a tablet. "The intern situation has been resolved." Silas began, his voice dangerously calm. Beatrice smiled thinly. "I assume you've terminated her contract. It's for the best. A hard lesson, but a necessary one." "Oh, a lesson has certainly been learned," Silas said, his grey eyes turning to ice. He nodded to Isabel. Isabel tapped the tablet, and the security footage of Beatrice's assistant taking the silk played on the large screen on the wall. She then brought up the financial records, tracing the payment to the blogger, and the IT report, pinpointing the source of the file corruption. Beatrice's face went white. The mask of serene control shattered, revealing the raw, venomous ambition beneath. "It's fabricated," she hissed. "She's turned you against your own family. That little tramp from the gutter." "Enough!" Silas's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You didn't do this to her, Beatrice. You did this to me. You used a good, innocent person as a pawn in your pathetic, endless game for control. You tried to poison my judgment to make me doubt my own instincts. You tried to turn an act of kindness that saved my life into a weapon against me." He stood up, his towering presence filling the room. "The board has been notified. They are voting on your immediate and permanent removal from your position and from this company. I suggest you have your office cleared out by morning. You are no longer welcome at Sterling Atelier. You are no longer welcome in my life." Beatrice stared at him, her face a mask of pure hatred. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the room, her empire crumbling around her. Silas was left in the silent boardroom, the ugly truth of his sister's betrayal settling around him. He had protected Clara, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the darkness he had been forced to confront. The atelier was safe, but he wondered if the innocent, talented young woman he had brought into his world could ever truly thrive in a place so full of shadows. The aftermath of Beatrice's ousting sent shockwaves through the atelier. The truth, carefully managed by Isabel, was circulated. Clara Hayes had been the victim of a vicious campaign of corporate sabotage orchestrated by a disgraced executive. Overnight, her status changed. The whispers and sneers from the other interns were replaced by a grudging, fearful respect. She was no longer the waitress. She was the woman who had survived a sterling family civil war. The ordeal had changed Clara too. The fear and self-doubt had been burned away in the crucible of Beatrice's betrayal, leaving behind a core of hardened steel. She returned to the intern program not as a timid outsider, but as a designer with a story to tell. With Beatrice gone, Silas's mentorship became more direct. He took a personal interest in her development, spending hours with her in the studio, pushing her concepts, refining her technique, and teaching her the intricate business of fashion. He wasn't just her boss, he became her champion. He saw in her a raw, untainted creativity that the industry had almost crushed, and he was determined to see it flourish. Clara thrived under his guidance. Her designs became bolder, more confident. She fused the gritty reality of her past with the aspirational elegance of the Sterling brand, creating something new and authentic. She wasn't just making beautiful clothes. She was telling stories in fabric and thread. A year and a half passed. The pinnacle of the industry calendar, New York Fashion Week, arrived. Sterling Atelier's show was the most anticipated event. The gilded ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was packed with the global fashion elite editors from every major magazine, influential bloggers, A-list celebrities, and wealthy clients. The show was a triumph. Silas's main collection was hailed as a masterpiece of modern design. But as the final model left the runway, the lights dimmed, then came up again. Silas himself stepped onto the stage, a rare public appearance that sent a murmur through the crowd. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice amplified throughout the hall. "Tonight we have celebrated the heritage of Sterling Atelier. But fashion is not just about heritage. It is about the future. It is about new voices. It is my distinct honor to present the debut capsule collection from our newest associate designer, a woman of extraordinary talent, integrity, and resilience. I present to you Clara Hayes." A new beat of music began, and the first model walked out. The collection was titled Bowery Bloom. It was a stunning tribute to Clara's journey. There were gowns that shimmered like rain on pavement coats, with the severe protective lines of city architecture, and delicate blouses embroidered with patterns that mimicked cracks in a sidewalk through which a flower might grow. The materials were a mix of high and low luxurious silks, paired with treated denim, delicate chiffon, contrasted with tough, structured wool. It was a collection that understood both hardship and hope. The finale piece was a masterwork. It was a charcoal grey peacoat, impeccably tailored, but with a silhouette that was both powerful and gentle. And on the cuff of one sleeve, embroidered in subtle, gleaming crimson thread, was the distinctive cross-stitch pattern that had started it all. It was a tribute to her mother, to her own past, and to the single act of kindness that had changed her life. When the final model stopped, the room was silent for a beat. And then it erupted. The applause was thunderous, genuine, and overwhelming. Clara, waiting nervously in the wings, was pushed gently forward by Silas. She stepped out into the blinding lights, her heart pounding. She saw the entire audience on their feet. In the front row, she saw Silas not smiling, but giving her a slow, proud nod of profound respect. Next to him was a beaming Isabelle Laurent. And a few seats down, an invited guest of honor, was Mrs. Gable from the diner, weeping with joy. Even Mr. Henderson was there, tucked away in a back row, looking utterly flabbergasted. As Clara Hayes stood on the runway, taking her bow under the adoring lights of the fashion world, she was no longer the poor waitress from the daily grind. She was a designer in her own right, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most exquisite designs are not crafted in a studio, but forged in the fires of compassion, integrity, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of others. Her future, once a frayed and broken thread, had been rewoven into a magnificent tapestry, all because of a single coat given on a cold winter's night. The story of Clara Hayes and Silas Sterling is more than just a tale of fortune reversed. It's a powerful reminder of the unseen connections that bind us all. It proves that our true worth isn't measured by what we own, but by what we are willing to give away. Clara's simple act of compassion wasn't a transaction expecting a return. It was a pure reflection of her character. And in the end, it was her character, not just her hidden talent, that the world of luxury couldn't help but reward. Her story teaches us that integrity is the most timeless design, and kindness is the one accessory that never goes out of style. It challenges us to look closer at the strangers we meet, and to never underestimate the power of our own small gestures to change a life, or even our own. If this story moved you, please let us know by hitting the like button. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that goodness is its own reward. And for more incredible, true-life stories that uncover the extraordinary hiding in our everyday lives, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening. The sound that broke Cressida Bishop's life wasn't a scream, but the delicate shatter of a champagne flute on marble. It was her husband's gala, a celebration of his fashion empire, and she stood frozen 5 months pregnant, watching him kiss another woman under the glare of a crystal chandelier. The woman was his new star designer, but it wasn't the kiss that shattered her. It was his words when he finally saw her. He didn't look guilty, just annoyed. "Darling." He sighed, a whisper of pure venom. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just business. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby." Her world didn't just crack. It atomized. That was the night she walked out with nothing but a broken heart and a life growing inside her, completely unaware that the key to his entire kingdom was already in her hands. Life in the Montclair penthouse was an exercise in curated perfection, from the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline like a living masterpiece to the stark white orchids that were replaced every 3 days. Everything was designed to be beautiful, flawless, and untouchable. Cressida, or Cress as she preferred, often felt like just another one of those exquisite, fragile objects. Her husband, Lucius Montclair, was the architect of this world. He was the charismatic, razor-sharp CEO of Montclair Couture, an empire built on the dazzling, cutthroat world of high fashion. To the public, he was a visionary. To his board, a titan. To Cress, he was the man who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of ambition and charm, who saw her a young, promising textile designer and decided she would be his. Their meeting had been a fairy tale. She was interning at a small artisanal fabric mill when he'd come scouting for new materials. He was captivated not by her designs, which he called charming but provincial, but by her quiet grace and the way she seemed to complement his own dazzling persona. He pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate acquisition. Within 6 months, they were married. Cress, swept away by the grandeur and the intensity of his affection, believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She soon learned, however, that being Mrs. Montclair meant her own ambitions were expected to be packed away like last season's collection. Her design sketchbook, once filled with vibrant, innovative patterns, gathered dust on a shelf in her cavernous walk-in closet. When she tried to show him her work, he would pat her hand indulgently. "That's lovely, my dear," he'd say, his eyes already on his phone. "But you have a much more important role now. You're the face of my home, the hostess of my parties. Leave the hard work to me." The penthouse, for all its beauty, became her gilded cage. Her days were a structured sequence of appointments, with event planners, nutritionists, and personal trainers, all meticulously scheduled by Lucius's assistant. Her friends were Lucius's friends, wives of bankers and executives, who spoke of charity galas and summering in the Hamptons, their conversations as sterile and polished as the marble floors beneath their feet. Cress felt a part of herself, the creative, passionate part, slowly suffocating. The news of her pregnancy should have been a joyous occasion, a fresh start. When she told Lucius, placing the positive test on his polished mahogany desk, he looked up from a quarterly report, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He simply nodded slowly. "Good," he said, as if she had just successfully closed a deal. "A son, I hope. An heir is good for the brand's image. Legacy." His reaction was a cold splash of water, but Cress tried to rationalize it. He was a busy man, always thinking about the business. She threw herself into the pregnancy. hoping the shared experience of creating a life would bridge the growing chasm between them. She started sketching again this time, designs for baby clothes using soft organic fabrics. She imagined a small independent line, something of her own. One evening, brimming with a rare surge of confidence, she laid out her sketches and business proposal on the dining room table before he got home. She had worked on it for weeks, researching suppliers, costing out materials, and even creating a brand name, Bishop's Weave, a nod to her family name and her grandfather who had been a tailor. Lucius walked in, loosening his tie, his face tight with the stress of the day. He glanced at the papers scattered across the table, and his lip curled into a faint sneer. "What's all this? It's my idea," Cress began, her voice trembling slightly. "A luxury baby clothing line. The market is strong, and I have a unique perspective on sustainable fabrics." He picked up a sketch of a tiny, hand-stitched romper. He held it for a moment before letting it drop back onto the table. "Cressida, we've discussed this. Your hobby is charming, but it's not a business. Montclair Couture deals in power and desire, not baby clothes. It would dilute the brand." "It wouldn't be part of Montclair Couture," she insisted, her heart sinking. "It would be mine, something I built." He laughed, then a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Built, darling, you have no idea what it takes to build something. You live in a world I built for you. Your job is to be here, to be beautiful, and soon to be a mother. That should be enough for you. Now let's clear this away. We have the Future of Fashion Gala tomorrow night, and I need you to look rested." The finality in his tone was absolute. He didn't see her. He saw a function, a role to be played. The dismissal of her dream of her very identity beyond being his wife was more painful than any overt act of cruelty. As she gathered her sketches, her hands shaking, she felt the first true deep crack appear in the flawless facade of her life. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage, and for the first time, she was rattling the bars, wondering if she had the strength to break them. The gala, meant to be a celebration of his success, now loomed like a final judgment on her own life's failures. The Future of Fashion Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, and Lucius Montclair was its undisputed king. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters weaved through the throngs with trays of shimmering champagne, and the air hummed with the electric buzz of power money and influence. Cress felt a familiar sense of detachment as she stood by Lucius's side, a practiced smile fixed on her face. She wore a deep emerald gown of Montclair silk, a dress chosen for her, designed to perfectly accommodate her 5-month baby bump, while still exuding effortless elegance. To the outside world, she was the picture of a serene, glowing mother-to-be, the perfect consort to the man of the hour. Inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Lucius's dismissal of her business idea the night before had left a hollow ache in her chest that no amount of couture could cover. Lucius was in his element, holding court, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He accepted congratulations, his laughter booming his charisma, a tangible force field. But his eyes kept darting across the room, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place, anticipation, perhaps in their depths. Lucius, darling, a triumph as always, a gushing socialite, air-kissed them both. "We do what we can, Brenda," Lucius replied with a practiced, self-deprecating charm. "But the real future of this house is standing right over there." He gestured towards the stage, where a willowy woman with fire-red hair and a predatory smile was speaking to a cluster of fashion journalists. This was Giselle Dubois, Montclair Couture's new head designer, poached from a rival Parisian house with an astronomical salary. She was Lucius's latest, most celebrated acquisition, hailed as a design prodigy who would propel the brand into the stratosphere. Cress had met Giselle only once, a brief, chilly introduction, where the designer's eyes had swept over Cress with a look of utter disinterest, as if she were a piece of outdated furniture. Now, watching her command the room, Cress felt a prickle of unease. "I need to go speak with the press, darling," Lucius said, squeezing her arm. "Mingle. Look radiant." He left her side, and she felt instantly adrift. She made her way through the crowd, nodding and smiling, her mind a million miles away. She found a quiet alcove near a balcony, seeking a moment of respite. The cool night air was a relief. From her vantage point, she could see most of the ballroom. She saw Lucius make his way over to Giselle. He didn't join the press circle. Instead, he drew Giselle away towards a shadowed corridor behind a large floral arrangement. Cress's unease sharpened into a cold dread. She told herself she was being paranoid hormonal, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, she slipped out of the alcove and moved towards the corridor, keeping to the edges of the room. The thumping bass of the music masked her footsteps. As she neared the floral display, she could hear their voices low and intimate. "The collection is a masterpiece, but you, my dear, are the true work of art," Lucius was saying, his voice a low purr she hadn't heard him use with her in years. "And you are the patron who knows how to display it." Giselle's throaty laugh replied, "Is your lovely little incubator enjoying the party?" The casual cruelty of the word incubator struck Cress with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "She plays her part," Lucius said dismissively. "She's content. As long as she has her charities and her nesting instincts, she's perfectly manageable." Cress peeked through a gap in the orchids. She saw Lucius's hand slide from Giselle's waist to cup her face. He leaned in and kissed her, not a peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss, filled with a passion Cress had only ever dreamed of. Time seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. In that moment, Cress's world, already cracked, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the complete and utter negation of her existence. She was a part, a manageable incubator. Her love, her pregnancy, their life together, it was all a sham, a carefully managed piece of brand strategy. She stumbled back, knocking a waiter's tray. A single champagne flute teetered and then fell shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of her own heart. The sound made them both turn. Lucius's eyes widened, not with guilt or remorse, but with pure, unadulterated annoyance. He strode out of the corridor, Giselle a smug shadow behind him. "Cressida," he said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes cold as ice. "What are you doing, skulking in the corners?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. "I saw you, Lucius." He glanced at the onlookers who were beginning to stare, his face hardening into a mask of public control. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and steered her towards a side exit. "Don't you dare make a scene here," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "You will ruin everything." "You ruined everything." She finally choked out the words, raw and ragged. "Our marriage, our baby." They were in a deserted hallway now. He finally let her go, pushing her against the wall. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and she saw nothing but contempt. "Our baby," he scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's a convenient distraction for you, isn't it?" Something to keep you busy. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby. The words from the opening hook. The final fatal blow. He had taken the one pure, precious thing in her life, their unborn child, and twisted it into another insult, another way to diminish her. Something inside Cress snapped. The grief, the shock, the years of quiet subservience, it all coalesced into a single clarifying moment of cold, hard certainty. She looked him dead in the eye, her tears suddenly gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I should focus, but not on the baby, on getting as far away from you as I possibly can." Before he could react, she turned and walked away. Not back to the party, but down the hall past the kitchens and out a service exit into the cold night air. The city lights blurred as she walked a taxi's headlights, cutting through the darkness. She didn't look back. She left behind the diamonds, the silk gown, the penthouse, the lies. She walked out with nothing but the clothes on her back, a life growing inside her, and the chilling echo of her husband's final unforgivable words. The shattering was complete. Now all that was left were the ruins. The cold night air hit Cress like a slap, a brutal awakening from the suffocating warmth of the gala. The emerald silk gown felt like a costume from another life, thin and useless against the city's unforgiving chill. Her manicured hands, accustomed to the soft leather of a chauffeured car, fumbled in her tiny clutch. She had her phone, a lipstick, and a single credit card, a supplementary card on Lucius's account, which she knew would be cancelled by morning. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. She was pregnant alone and effectively homeless on a downtown street corner. The towering skyscrapers that once represented a life of luxury now seemed to mock her, their glittering facades cold and indifferent. For a terrifying moment, she had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and the friends she'd cultivated over the past few years were Lucius's allies, their loyalty bought and paid for by his influence. Then a memory surfaced, a beacon in the storm. Mrs. Peterson. Martha Peterson was her landlady from college, a kind, no-nonsense widow who rented out rooms in her modest but impeccably kept brownstone in a quiet, older part of the city. Cress had kept in touch, sending a Christmas card every year, a small link to a life that was truly her own. With trembling fingers, she found the number and called. "Cressida? Dear, is that you? It's past midnight. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Peterson's voice was warm but laced with concern. A sob escaped Cress's lips, the first sound she'd made since leaving the hotel. "No," she whispered the word, cracking. "Nothing is all right. Can I come over? I have nowhere else to go." There was no hesitation. "Of course, dear. The kettle's always on. Come home." Home. The word was a balm to her shattered soul. A taxi ride across the city felt like a journey across worlds. She left the sleek, modern steel and glass of Lucius's district and entered a neighborhood of brick buildings, fire escapes and laundromats that glowed warmly in the dark. Mrs. Peterson opened the door before Cress even knocked. She was a small, sturdy woman with kind eyes and hair the color of steel wool. She took one look at Cress's tear-streaked face and the ridiculously opulent gown and simply opened her arms. Cress collapsed into her embrace, the raw, unfiltered grief she'd been suppressing, finally erupting in a storm of sobs. Mrs. Peterson led her inside, sat her down at the worn oak kitchen table and wrapped a thick knitted afghan around her shoulders. She placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in Cress's hands and sat opposite her, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. Over the next hour, the whole sordid story came pouring out, the dismissiveness, the affair with Giselle, the final cruel words about the baby. Mrs. Peterson listened without judgment, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a quiet, simmering anger on Cress's behalf. "That man," she said, finally, her voice firm, "is a fool of the highest order. To throw away a diamond because he's too busy admiring cheap glass." That night, Cress slept in the small attic room she had rented as a student, the scent of lavender and old books a comforting lullaby. The mattress was lumpy. The sheets were faded cotton, not Egyptian, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. The next few weeks were a brutal adjustment. The first thing she did was take the taxi to a consignment shop and sell the emerald gown and the diamond earrings she was wearing. The money was a pittance compared to their worth, but it was hers. It was enough for a few weeks' rent to Mrs. Peterson, who initially refused, but relented when Cress insisted a simple wardrobe of second-hand clothes and groceries. The whiplash of her new reality was staggering. One day she was attending fittings for custom maternity wear. The next she was counting change to see if she could afford organic milk. The nausea of her first trimester returned with a vengeance amplified by stress and a diet that no longer included chef-prepared, nutrient-balanced meals. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. Some days the weight of her grief and fear was so heavy she could barely get out of bed. She would lie there, one hand on her growing belly, and weep for the future she had lost and for the child who would be born into this chaos. Lucius made no attempt to contact her. The credit card was cancelled within hours, as she'd predicted. A week later, a curt email from his lawyer arrived informing her that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that given the circumstances of her desertion, she should not expect a generous settlement. There was no mention of the baby. It was as if she and their child had been surgically excised from his life. The cold corporate cruelty of it all reignited a spark of anger within her. It was a small spark, but in the darkness of her despair, it was enough to see by. Mrs. Peterson was her rock. She would leave trays of toast and soup outside Cress's door, never pushing, but always present. She'd coax her out for walks in the local park, encouraging her to feel the sun on her face. "One foot in front of the other, dear," she'd say. "That's all anyone can do." Slowly, painfully, Cress began to piece herself back together. The storm was still raging, but she was no longer adrift. She was learning to build a raft. She started sketching again, not for a business, but for herself. She drew the faces she saw in the park, the intricate patterns of leaves on the sidewalk, the way the light hit the brick buildings at sunset. It was a way to reclaim a part of herself that Lucius had tried to extinguish. She was no longer Cressida Montclair, the millionaire's wife. She was Cress Bishop, a designer, a survivor, and a mother-to-be. And in the quiet anonymity of her new life that felt like a promotion, months bled into one another. The city transitioned from the crispness of late autumn to the deep freeze of winter. Cress's belly grew round and full, a constant living reminder of the new life she was now solely responsible for. The sharp, acute pain of Lucius's betrayal had dulled into a persistent heavy ache, but her focus had shifted. Her survival and the well-being of her baby became her entire world. She found a quiet rhythm in her life with Mrs. Peterson. She helped with chores around the house. Her sketches began to fill a new portfolio, and she even took on some small freelance jobs designing logos and brochures for local businesses. The pay was meager, but the sense of accomplishment was immeasurable. Each dollar she earned was a brick in the foundation of her new independent life. One particularly cold and snowy afternoon, with the city hushed under a blanket of white, Mrs. Peterson asked for her help clearing out some old boxes from a storage closet. "My old bones aren't what they used to be," she said with a smile. Amongst the dusty relics of a life well lived, Cress found a small wooden trunk tucked away in a corner. It was hers. Her mother had sent it to Mrs. Peterson for safekeeping when Cress had first moved in with Lucius, filled with childhood mementos and things that didn't fit into the sterile minimalism of the penthouse. She had completely forgotten about it. Curious, she pried open the lid. Inside were photo albums, her old art school projects, and a collection of her grandfather's things. Robert Bishop had been a master tailor, a quiet, meticulous man who had passed away when Cress was in her late teens. He had been her first mentor, the one who taught her about the feel of different fabrics, the importance of a perfect stitch, the soul that could be woven into a garment. She lifted out his old sewing kit, the heavy shears he used to cut cloth, and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was not jewelry, but a single ornate old-fashioned brass key and a thick sealed envelope made of heavy parchment. Her name, Cressida, was written on the front in her grandfather's elegant looping script. Her heart pounded as she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was dated a week before he passed away. "My dearest Cressida, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope that you have found happiness in your life. I am writing to you about a part of my past I rarely spoke of. Long before I was a simple neighborhood tailor, I was a partner in a business. I was the craftsman, the artist. My partner was the salesman, the visionary. Together we founded a small but exceptional textile company called Ariadne Weavers. We created fabrics of unparalleled quality. Over time, my partner, a man named Jonathan Montclair, wanted to expand into fashion, into a world of glamour and branding that held little appeal for me. We had different visions. I wanted to create art. He wanted to build an empire. We parted ways amicably. I sold him my operational shares, but I kept my founding stake, a silent, controlling interest in the parent company we had established. I had no interest in boardrooms or stock markets, but I wanted to ensure the legacy of our quality was protected. I put these shares into a blind trust for you, my only grandchild. The company evolved, and Ariadne Weavers became the foundation of what you now likely know as Montclair Couture. Jonathan's son, and perhaps his grandson, may have forgotten that the roots of their grand empire lie in the hands of a quiet tailor. This key will open a safe deposit box at the Sterling National Bank downtown. Inside you will find the trust documents. They are structured to give you full control upon your 30th birthday, or under a force majeure clause, which can be enacted in the event of significant personal distress or upheaval. My lawyer, a brilliant man named David Chen, holds the second key and the full instructions. His card is enclosed. This is your legacy, Cressida. Not a weapon, but a shield. It is the fruit of my life's work. Use it to protect yourself, to build something beautiful and true, and to ensure that true craftsmanship is never sacrificed for the sake of empty glamour. Be happy, my dear girl. With all my love. Grandfather Robert Cress read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking so violently the parchment rattled. Montclair Couture, Lucius's company. Her grandfather was the silent founder. It seemed impossible, a fantasy. She stared at the heavy brass key in her palm. It felt impossibly real. A shield, he had called it. Right now, she needed a shield more than anything. The next morning, driven by a dizzying mix of hope and disbelief, she called the number on the enclosed business card. A calm, professional voice answered. "Law offices of Chen and Associates. My name is Cressida Bishop," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. "I was told to contact a Mr. David Chen. It's regarding my grandfather, Robert Bishop." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Chen has been expecting your call for a very long time," the voice replied. "Can you come in this afternoon?" The law office was in a sleek, modern building, a world away from Mrs. Peterson's cozy brownstone. But Cress walked in not as a supplicant, but as a woman on a mission. David Chen was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He greeted her not with pity, but with a deep professional respect. He already had his key. Together they went to the bank. The safe deposit box was opened, and inside, nestled in a leather-bound folio, were the documents. As Mr. Chen explained the complex legal language, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Her grandfather hadn't just left her some stock. He had left her a 52% controlling interest in the holding company that owned Montclair Couture and all its assets. It was an ironclad, unassailable majority stake. Because Lucius's father had diluted his own shares over the years to fund acquisitions and pay off debts, Lucius's own portion, which he believed gave him ultimate control, was only around 35%. He was a king ruling a kingdom he didn't actually own. Your grandfather's force majeure clause is quite clear. Mr. Chen explained, his voice calm and steady, as he looked at the heavily pregnant, determined woman before him. Your current circumstances, divorce, financial abandonment, more than satisfy the conditions. The trust is now yours to command. The question is, Ms. Bishop, what do you want to do with it? Cress looked down at the documents at her grandfather's name, entwined with the Montclairs. She thought of Lucius's sneering face, of Giselle's cruel nickname for her, of the way her dreams had been casually crushed. But more than that, she thought of her grandfather's words, "Build something beautiful and true." A slow, determined smile spread across her face. The storm hadn't broken her. It had washed away the debris and revealed the foundation that had been there all along. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I want to call a meeting, an extraordinary general meeting of the shareholders, and I want to introduce them to their new majority owner." The discovery of her inheritance didn't trigger an immediate, vengeful charge. Instead, it ignited a slow, deliberate fire within Cress. The months of helplessness and fear were burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. She was no longer a victim adrift in a storm. She was the storm itself, gathering strength, waiting for the perfect moment to make landfall. David Chen became her general, her strategist. They met not in his gleaming corporate office, but in the quiet, sunlit parlor of Mrs. Peterson's brownstone, a war room hidden in plain sight. Over cups of tea and plates of biscuits, they pored over decades of company financials, board meeting minutes, and shareholder reports. Cress wasn't just claiming an inheritance. She was earning it. She devoured every document, learning the intricate dance of corporate governance, finance, and law. She discovered the company's weaknesses, its strengths, and most importantly, the rot that had set in under Lucius's leadership. While Montclair Couture's public image was stronger than ever, thanks to Giselle's flashy, critically acclaimed but astronomically expensive new collection, The company's finances told a different story. Lucius was leveraging assets to fund lavish marketing campaigns and his own exorbitant lifestyle. He had fired dozens of long-serving loyal employees, master tailors, pattern makers, and textile experts who had been with the company for decades, some since her grandfather's era, replacing them with cheaper, less experienced labor to cut costs. He was sacrificing the very soul of the company, its commitment to quality craftsmanship, for short-term buzz and profit. He was turning her grandfather's legacy into a hollow, gilded shell. "He's arrogant," David Chen observed one afternoon, tapping a finger on a damning quarterly report. "He believes he's untouchable. That's our greatest advantage. He won't see us coming." Their plan, which Kress privately named the Phoenix Agenda, was twofold. First, they needed to consolidate her power silently. While her 52% stake gave her control, David advised acquiring a few more percentage points on the open market through a proxy buyer. This would not only fortify her position, but also create a small stir, a tremor that might put Lucius on edge, but wouldn't reveal the true source of the earthquake to come. "We make him look for a threat from a rival corporation or a hedge fund," David explained. "He'll be looking in the wrong direction, scanning the horizon for battleships, while our submarine glides right underneath him." Second Kress needed to be ready. It wasn't enough to be the owner. She had to be the leader. She spent her days studying and her nights sketching. But now her designs weren't for a quaint baby line. They were for a new Montclair couture, a collection that honored her grandfather's commitment to fabric and form, but was infused with a bold, modern vision. It was a vision of strength, resilience, and quiet power. Everything she herself was becoming. As her due date approached, her resolve only hardened. The kicks and flutters in her womb were a constant reminder of what she was fighting for, not just for herself, but for her child's future, a future free from the shadow of a man like Lucius Montclair. Meanwhile, Lucius remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware. Kress's quiet disappearance from his life was to him a problem solved. He was seen at every party, every opening, with the triumphant Giselle Dubois on his arm. The press hailed them as the new power couple of fashion. In a widely circulated interview, Lucius was asked about his recent divorce. "Sometimes people grow in different directions," he'd said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "My focus has always been, and will always be, on the future of this company. I require a partner who shares that vision, not one who is distracted by domestic trivialities." The words relayed to Kress by David were like fuel on the fire. Domestic trivialities. He was talking about their child. A week before the annual shareholders' meeting, Kress gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace. Holding her daughter in her arms in the quiet hospital room, looking into her tiny, perfect face, Kress knew every fear, every tear, every moment of struggle had been worth it. This was not just about taking back a company. It was about reclaiming her life and building a legacy of strength for her daughter. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived a cool, crisp morning 6 weeks after Grace was born. Lucius was expecting a routine victory lap. The press was already lauding his incredible turnaround of the brand. He had prepared a triumphant speech about record-breaking sales from Giselle's latest collection and his bold vision for the future. Kress, however, was preparing for battle. She left Grace in the loving care of Mrs. Peterson. She didn't dress in a flashy, attention-grabbing gown. Instead, she chose a custom-tailored suit of her own design, made from a deep charcoal grey wool that her grandfather would have admired. It was elegant, powerful and understated. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional chignon, and her face, though tired from sleepless nights with a newborn, was set with a resolve of forged steel. As David Chen held the door of the car for her, outside the corporate tower that bore the Montclair name, he gave her a final reassuring nod. "Ready, Ms. Bishop?" She took a deep breath, the city air cool and clean. She thought of her grandfather's letter of her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib. She was no longer the broken, weeping woman who had fled into the night. She was a phoenix, risen from the ashes, and she was about to claim her sky. "I'm ready," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and power that was entirely her own. The Montclair Couture boardroom was on the 50th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary of power overlooking the sprawling city. It was designed to intimidate with a long, imposing table of polished black granite and chairs that resembled minimalist thrones. The shareholders and board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women in expensive suits, were already assembled. At the head of the table sat Lucius Montclair, radiating an aura of absolute command. He was tanned, smiling the very picture of a man at the apex of his success. Beside him, in a seat of honor, usually reserved for the COO, was Giselle Dubois, looking smug and victorious in a shockingly red dress. She was not a board member, but her presence was a clear statement of her power and influence within Lucius's new world order. "As you can see from the preliminary reports," Lucius began, his voice smooth and confident, "Giselle's Metamorphosis collection has not only garnered universal acclaim, but has also driven sales up by 200% this quarter. Our stock price is at an all-time high. The future of Montclair Couture has never been brighter." He launched into a self-congratulatory speech filled with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and brand actualization. He painted a picture of a future built on his singular, brilliant vision. The board members nodded along their expressions, ranging from impressed to sycophantic. It was at that moment, just as Lucius was pausing for dramatic effect, that the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman they didn't recognize. She was flanked by the formidable David Chen, whose reputation as one of the city's sharpest corporate lawyers preceded him. The woman was poised, her expression unreadable, her tailored grey suit a stark contrast to Giselle's flamboyant red. She radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. Lucius frowned, irritated by the interruption. "I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. Security." But before anyone could move, David Chen stepped forward, placing a slim leather portfolio on the granite table. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Montclair. We are precisely where we are supposed to be." Cress stepped into the room, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the marble floor. Her eyes swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Giselle's confused sneer, before finally landing on Lucius. Lucius stared at her. Recognition dawned, slowly contorting his features into a mask of pure disbelief. This was Cressida, but it wasn't. The timid, accommodating woman he had discarded was gone. This woman was a stranger, powerful, confident, and looking at him not with heartbreak, but with an unnervingly calm detachment like a scientist observing a specimen. "Cressida," he finally stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady, filling the suddenly silent room, "is Ms. Bishop, and I am here to attend my first shareholders' meeting." A confused murmur rippled through the room. "Shareholder," one of the board members scoffed. "With all due respect, The shares held by employees and minor investors don't grant access to this meeting. David Chen opened his portfolio. Ms. Bishop is not a minor investor, he stated calmly, sliding official notarized documents across the table towards the board's chairman. She is the sole beneficiary of the Robert Bishop Blind Trust. As of 2 months ago, she has taken active control of that trust. The chairman, a portly man named George Finney, picked up the documents, his eyes widening as he read. The Bishop Trust, but that's been dormant for decades. It's a founding stake. His voice trailed off as the implication hit him. He looked up, his face pale. To be precise, David Chen continued, the trust holds 52% of the voting shares of the parent company, Montclair Holdings International. My client, Ms. Cressida Bishop, is the new majority owner. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of pure shock. You could have heard a pin drop. Giselle's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The board members stared first at the documents, then at Cress, their minds scrambling to process the impossible truth. Lucius's face had drained of all color. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. That's impossible, he breathed, shaking his head. It's a lie. My father, your father knew. Cress said, her voice cutting through his denial like a shard of glass. He knew that the foundation of this entire empire belonged to my grandfather, the man whose artistry he built his brand upon, and then conveniently forgot. You, however, seem to have been kept in the dark. She walked slowly around the table until she stood directly opposite him. You spoke of your vision for the future, she said, her gaze unwavering. But your vision is one of debt disposability and disrespect for the legacy that made this company great. You fired craftsmen who had dedicated their lives to this house to fund her overpriced, overhyped collections. She gave a curt nod towards a horrified Giselle. You leveraged the company's assets to fund your own ego. You have mistaken flash for substance and buzz for value. She placed her hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table. Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder. This board is adjourned. A new meeting will be called tomorrow to elect a new board of directors. Mr. Montclair, your position as CEO and chairman is terminated. You have 1 hour to clear your personal belongings from your office. Security will escort you out. Lucius just stared at her, speechless, his empire crumbling around him in the space of 5 minutes. You can't do this, he finally whispered, his voice cracking with desperation and rage. Cress leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, intense pitch for his ears alone. You once told me to focus on my little hobby. You were right. I found one. It's called owning your entire world. You said a son would be good for the brand's legacy. You were wrong. A daughter is. With that, she straightened up and addressed the stunned room. My name is Cressida Bishop, and I am the future of this company. The silence in the boardroom stretched for a full 10 seconds, a vacuum of pure shock that sucked all the air from the room. Then it fractured. Lucius Montclair, who had stood frozen as if turned to stone, finally came back to life, but as a grotesque parody of his former self. The charismatic control vanished, replaced by a raw, sputtering rage. Fraud, he roared, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the black granite table, a gesture that lacked its intended power and only betrayed his desperation. This is a fabrication, a pathetic, vengeful fantasy. My lawyers will bury you. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Cress didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a pillar of calm in his storm. On the contrary, Lucius, she replied, her voice level and cold. You are the one who has no idea. You never did. You saw a quiet wife, not a founder's heir. You saw a hobby, not a legacy. Your blindness is not my problem. Her composure seemed to enrage him further. He turned his pleading, wild eyes to the board members, the men and women who had idolized him just minutes before. Finney, tell her this is absurd. We are Montclair Couture. George Finney. The chairman meticulously avoided Lucius's gaze. His attention suddenly glued to the documents in his hands, as if they were the most fascinating text he had ever read. The other board members followed suit, shuffling papers, checking their phones, doing anything to avoid being caught in the blast radius of their fallen leader. They were sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water. Their allegiance had already shifted their minds furiously, calculating how to best position themselves in this new regime. Seeing no help there, Lucius's fury collapsed into a pathetic, desperate plea. Cressida. Cress, please, he whispered, the change in tone jarring. We can talk about this. There's been a misunderstanding. We can work something out, a settlement. It was the sight of Giselle that cut him short. Her face, a mask of horror, was twisted with a fury that mirrored his own. But her anger was aimed at him, the man whose power had been her shield and her platform. With a strangled cry of disgust, she shot Cress a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, grabbed her ludicrously expensive handbag, and fled. Her stiletto heels clicked a frantic, panicked rhythm on the marble floor, the sound of an era of cheap spectacle running for its life. Her exit seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. Lucius deflated the fight, draining out of him, leaving a slumped, hollowed-out man. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked his age. The two security guards who entered the room were almost a mercy, their impassive presence putting an end to the humiliating spectacle. They flanked him, their quiet professionalism, a stark contrast to his emotional disintegration. As they led him toward the door, he finally looked at Cress one last time, his eyes searching for something. Pity, regret, a flicker of the woman he once knew. He found nothing but the cool, steady gaze of a stranger who now owned his entire world. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing with a profound finality. The reign of Lucius Montclair was over. The boardroom was still thick with tension. Cress allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment, letting the new reality cement itself in the minds of everyone present. Then she turned to the pale-faced chairman. Mr. Finney, she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. Please schedule the extraordinary meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. My office will forward you the agenda and the list of my proposed new board members. You are all welcome to tender your resignations beforehand if you feel you cannot align with the new direction of this company. It was a clear, professional dismissal. David Chen gave a slight, satisfied nod, gathering his papers. As the shaken board members filed out, avoiding her eyes, he placed a steadying hand on her arm. You were magnificent, Ms. Bishop. Cress let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep sense of exhaustion and a startlingly clear sense of purpose. This was just the first step, David, she said. The real work starts now. Her first day as chairwoman of Montclair Holdings was a blur of calculated action, but she didn't begin in the executive suite. She bypassed the elevators and took the service stairs down to the workshops, the true heart of the company. When she entered, a hush fell over the room. The remaining artisans, the cutters, seamstresses, and textile experts looked up from their work. their faces etched with the anxious uncertainty of people who had grown used to the axe falling without warning. She gathered them together, standing not on a platform, but among them on the worn wooden floor. "My name is Cressida Bishop," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and sincerity. "Some of you may have known my grandfather, Robert Bishop." A few of the older workers exchanged surprised glances. An elderly tailor at the back, a man with hands gnarled from 60 years of holding a needle, let out a soft gasp. He remembered. "My grandfather believed that a garment's soul is in its fabric and its stitch." Cress continued, her gaze sweeping over their faces. "He believed in substance, in quality, in the irreplaceable value of a master's hand. This company was built on that belief, and under my leadership we are returning to it." She then announced her first executive order, the immediate reinstatement of every single craftsman Lucius had fired, with full back pay and a formal apology from the company. A wave of stunned disbelief was followed by a ripple of applause that grew into a heartfelt ovation. The old tailor, his eyes glistening with tears, stepped forward. "Robert Bishop," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was the finest man I ever knew. He would be so proud of you today, miss." In that moment, Cress wasn't just a CEO. She was a promise fulfilled, a legacy restored. Over the next few weeks, the transformation of Montclair Couture was seismic. Cress's Phoenix agenda was not just about a hostile takeover. It was a complete cultural and creative resurrection. The new motto she installed, etched onto the lobby wall, where a giant portrait of Lucius used to hang, was substance over spectacle. She walked through the design studio, which felt sterile and soulless under Giselle's tenure. Tucked away in a corner, she found Helen, a veteran pattern maker in her late 60s, who was quietly packing her things, assuming she would be next to go. Cress approached her and asked to see her personal sketchbook. Hesitantly, Helen revealed pages filled with designs of breathtaking elegance and structural genius ideas Lucius and Giselle had dismissed as too classic. "Helen," Cress said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not accepting your resignation. I'm offering you the position of head designer." The woman stared at her, speechless, as Cress explained her new vision, a company led by the talent that had been its bedrock all along. The most symbolic change was the C-suite itself. Lucius's office had been a monument to his ego, all black marble chrome and oversized modern art with a desk the size of a small car. Cress had it all stripped out. The dark walls were painted a warm, inviting white. Sunlight, once blocked by imposing blinds, was allowed to flood the space. In place of the massive desk, she brought in a large communal work table covered in fabric swatches and sketchbooks, and in the sunniest corner, she placed a beautiful handcrafted bassinet. Her daughter Grace would often sleep there as Cress worked, a living, breathing symbol of the company's new life, a future that was female, nurturing, and creative at its core. One evening, months after the takeover, Cress stood at the vast window of that transformed office, holding a sleeping Grace in her arms. The city lights glittered below, no longer mocking her, but spread out before her like a kingdom of her own making. She thought of the woman she had been, the heartbroken wife, fleeing a party in a borrowed gown, the terrified mother-to-be huddled in Mrs. Peterson's attic room. She thought of the weight of her grandfather's key in her palm, the key that had unlocked not just a fortune, but the strength that had been inside her all along. The world was calling her story a tale of revenge. But as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she knew it was something more profound. Revenge was a fire that consumed itself, leaving only ash. What she had done was an act of restoration. She had saved a legacy from ruin and built a future for her child. She was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was the architect of her own destiny, a creator, a leader, and a mother. She had walked out of her old life broken, but in doing so had discovered the parts of herself that were truly unbreakable. Her reign, the reign of a bishop, had only just begun. And there you have it, the incredible story of Cressida Bishop, a story that proves that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest souls. She went from a broken, pregnant wife with nothing to her name to the powerful leader of a fashion empire, not through revenge, but through resilience, intelligence, and by reclaiming a legacy she never knew she had. Her journey reminds us that our true strength often lies dormant, hidden in our history, and in our character, just waiting for a crisis to awaken it. It's a powerful lesson that sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly find yourself and build something even more magnificent in its place. What did you think of Cress's ultimate power move? Was Lucius's downfall everything you hoped it would be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and poetic justice, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of triumph, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable, real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for listening.